So this is the time we get to hear from you. Do we have any questions? Just come on up to the microphone. I'm sure you got something to say, something to ask. Nah, this is impossible, right? Where is Ithaca? Listen, I want to just talk. I'll ask Christopher. But you've seen other communities deal with these kinds of issues around the country. So very quickly, kind of give us an idea of how some communities, what kind of structures communities have created to come together. Is it the county planning department? Is it the economic development? Is it just the city? How does a community pull together? What kind of a structure to make decisions and move forward?
Great question. The easy answer is there are tons of options you can take. Some communities, the city council takes the leadership role. Oftentimes, it could be around the idea that, yes, the most important issue is to create more revenue for affordable housing, ideally targeting a certain population. So the city council may institute a housing fund of some sort and designate the housing authority, another organization, to be responsible for giving out those resources. Actually, in many cases, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow, we're seeing a lot of neighborhoods within those walkable urban places self-organize and create a conversation amongst themselves of saying, I a homeowner, I a renter, I a business person, what do we want our neighborhood to look like? And they've created their own plan and then worked with the development community to make sure that they were able to meet the metrics. So and the question is, you have to have a public, private, and civic leadership. I know sometimes we talk about P3s, right? But partnership is never really a third part of it. But really talk about the civic engagement, so the public engagement is important. So I'll give that a little bit more tomorrow, so that hopefully gives us a snapshot.
Thanks, Christopher. And if it's frustrating that we're talking about tomorrow and you weren't able to get in, look, we tried. We have right now a 65-person waiting list. So, if there's anybody here who knows they're not going to be able to make it after all tomorrow, where's Janet Catraccia? Janet's in the middle. She's handling our registration, which has been an amazing job. Talk to Janet. If you know you're registered for tomorrow but you can't make it, somebody else will be able to come in. So, T.Ann, did I see you come on up? Okay.
I have a question. And this has to do, this is a little scary.
Hold it closer to you.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. I have a question about tax credits, and maybe you could answer. I'm on the Ithaca Town Board. We have, over the past couple of years, approved some affordable housing complexes, and the developers have been utilizing tax credits. I have questions about the program. The developers come to us and indicate that they are not fiscally able to take advantage of the tax credits and build mixed-use communities. And I'm also concerned that once the investors or the tax credit recipients get their 15 years of tax credits, the communities can become market value. So I just wonder if you have any inside information on whether or not we can make some demands relative to deed restrictions to keep things affordable, and also how we might encourage a developer to make a project mixed use.
And I think you really want to say not just mixed use, but mixed income.
Exactly.
All right, so I'm going to tackle it in three parts. First and foremost, you mentioned the tax credit program. Generally speaking, you may know I've met some developers today who have been using the federal affordable housing tax credit, also known as LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit. It's a popular credit to help produce affordable housing. Primarily for those who are 60% AMI and lower. And oftentimes, the challenge of that program, and how many of you are actually developers? Just raise, okay. So some of you will understand this. The challenge of the credit is, one, is unpredictable. There's only so many sets of allocations giving out a year, and so you have to wait. And so if anyone who's in development or runs a business, you recognize that time can be your enemy, right? Also, the way the LIHTC program is structured, those who are the investor in the project, who's retaining the equity, are within the ownership stack. So if you're trying to bring other debt, whether it's from a bank or other equity, it's very hard to do that without having a real conversation with that equity, the investor partner of the LIHTC credit. And so oftentimes you find LIHTC program projects just being a truly affordable housing project. And oftentimes I've made this, the issue you have, in addition to that, is if you want it to be mixed income and mixed use, you put the onus on the developer and his retailer and others to figure out a financial and legal structure to make that happen. And oftentimes what happens, if you wanted to do a mixed use, you have to condominize the actual apartment away from the actual retail or commercial space. That's more time, that's more complexity, for those of my developers, that means more lawyers, that means more accountants. It's brain drain. And especially, I said this during dinner, if you are a drivable suburban developer, you have the skill set, and I apologize if you're that developer, of a NASCAR driver. All you have to do is go 150 miles an hour and go left. If you want to build in walkable urban development that's mixed use, mixed income, that has great storm water and so forth, and have, deal with the soil issues, right? That's a level of skill set that's literally taking that NASCAR driver and asking him to fly a fighter jet going 600 miles an hour, left, right, up, down, while being shot at. Why I bring that up is it's important for the county and those who are in public leadership to understand the difficulty of doing the project that you're asking. And so you ask, what are some of the strategies you want to do? Well, one of the things I would say, there are a lot of communities that you should be targeting now that have great land value, i.e. cheap, where it takes not much for a land trust or land banking for the county or through some other agencies to take that, because that is something, as you saw on my slide, oftentimes the biggest hurdle is the land. Second, figure out ways, whether it's through infrastructure incentives, to help the developer reduce construction costs. And lastly, every developer will tell you there's nothing like someone coming to the table with $1, especially if they're patient. And oftentimes you have a situation where, unfortunately, conventional financing doesn't allow you to do mixed income and mixed age development. But if a city, through its economic development arm, actually has that as part of its agenda to provide that patient capital to developers, you will then attract those type of projects. And the last thing I would say, are most of your projects that you put out, are they RFPs or RFQs?
We don't put out, they come to us.
Sure. One of the questions I would say is maybe you should be thinking about how you actually structure your development process. Because you don't want every type of developer. You want a developer who actually has a proven record of doing mixed income, mixed use development. I think someone said it best. We don't ask someone, what are you going to do for me? And they tell you, you marry them. You actually look at their qualifications. Right? So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
I saw Larry Roberts. Okay.
So I'm Larry Roberts from the Finger Lakes Independence Center. We're the disability advocacy agency in Tompkins County. And I was wondering if you could talk about what's known, because there seems to be a lot known for adult to baby boomer people, of which actually I'm part of that too. But there seems to be a lot known about the housing preferences for older people. What do we know about the housing preferences for people with disabilities?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, because you're only limited so much time, you can't throw the kitchen sink at a presentation. One of the things that my colleague brought up before is this idea of universal design. And increasingly, we are finding that is becoming kind of a catch-all of no matter if you are a young family or someone who's 75 years old, universal design actually supports both of those types. And so, interesting enough, that is something that we're seeing across the country, particularly through a lot of our studies, beginning more demand. But again, as I have pointed out in my earlier comments, universal design means more different skill set, higher construction costs, but over a long term, the developer is most likely to get that project sold no matter who's the tenant or the owner. Another key thing is it's not only about what's inside the house. That's important, as my gentleman mentioned about those with disability, but it's also the community upon which that person could live in. So if you're walking down the street, you don't have curb cuts. The ability that someone can actually not only, take a walker and get up the sidewalk, but think about a mother with a stroller. Having universal design not only in a home but within the community is also important. So when I have these conversations, we're increasingly finding that we have to make sure the neighborhoods are accessible, not just for the able-bodied, but also those with disability. And I think if you do that, you'll find that it's not just the person who's disabled who needs that great sidewalk, but everyone else would like to have those amenities as well. Thanks.
Joel, just a second. I think Cynthia Brock, you came up. You're next, Joel, okay? All right, Cynthia Brock.
Thank you. I was intrigued by your comment about how to provide property tax relief for property owners who are being priced out of their homes as property values rise. My understanding is that those types of tax refunds or rebates, not getting the right word, is actually set by the state. And we as a municipality are unable to put in those types of protections for our homeowners. So what suggestions do you have, or what models have you seen that have worked to try to keep our families in our community and not be priced out over the long term?
Well, for one, anyone here at the state legislature present? Or staff? Well, the first thing I would suggest is getting them in this room to hear this. A lot of states are putting these in place where municipalities can actually, if they want to, explore these options. Another thing is that there are tons of scenarios where on the assess, or like where the city council actually does have the power. Now, does Tompkins County have the ability to do property taxes on themselves?
Yeah.
Yes. So in their own assessment, you can actually grandfather people in. Oftentimes this happens for individuals who are much, much older. When they hit 70 or 75 or become really elderly, you actually then give them a grandfather where you're capped. And then the city takes the hit. When you sell, sometimes when you sell, they basically get those revenues back. There are strategies you can do. That's one example. But one thing I will also point out, those of you who are homeowners, how many of you currently have renters in your homes right now? Just by show of hands. Okay. One of the things, oftentimes we have this conversation about affordability. Of course, the homeowner is the issue in terms of property tax. But one of the things that a homeowner, if you saw this slide, you might actually got a little tingle in your pocket. That basically says, over the next 10 years, in this region, a house that's located within the walkable urban place, you might be able to charge more. So the question I put back on this conversation at the Housing Summit, what incentives can I give to the homeowner who has the renter, maybe a student, maybe a worker at the hospital, someone who works at Cornell? How do I incentivize you not to increase your rent? And there are ways you can do that. And so that's the conversation that you have to have, because it can't be one side. It's all. And it has to be inclusive. And so those are just some of the things. If we have this conversation about how to protect the homeowner, you also got to realize that in a community like this where renters are using the current housing stock, how do you ensure that your natural incentive, right, is not only respected, but also is put in a position where you can make a good choice, which is keeping that renter over a longer period of time. Okay?
Joel Harlan.
My name's Joel Harlan. Everybody knows what I'm into. I've been to all of you for development, and it's coming true. We do need to expand. A lot of places we need to do is grow heights, not sprawled out in buildings.
Joel, you have a question.
Yeah. Why don't we start building at least the height 15-story dormitories for the Cornell and IC? You're spreading little stuff out, but you're not going up to meet the needs. And we are working on College Town to bring in more safer buildings, because it's a fire hazard with these students partying in the buildings, and it's overfilled beyond capacity. They live from the basement up to the ceiling.
So your question is, why don't we build tall buildings?
Why don't we get safer, taller buildings?
Okay, let him answer.
You know.
I think that's something where, thanks, Joel, as Ed especially was talking about, we have a real high demand for student housing. Vice President Lombardi will talk tomorrow about the survey that Cornell did of its students, and found that their preference was to live in more modern high-rise buildings. And so we're starting to see those projects really come to fruition or get started. They're in the pipeline along College Avenue, for example. So they're interested in that kind of support, that kind of housing. It's also, I think, the first time we've seen Cornell really take a deep dive into this and if I can just say, really take responsibility for the students who are already here. And I believe we'll start hearing more of a commitment that before we see new enrollment growth, that we'll really see development of new housing. And it's actually been a long-term policy of local government here. And actually, going back to Ezra Cornell, who wanted the students to be part of the community, which is a laudable goal. There was always, for a long time, the policy of the city in particular was that housing for students should primarily be off campus so that they're supporting property taxes. Dorms on campus don't pay property taxes. So there's a balance there. There's a trade-off. So our pitch to Cornell in the last few years is that the balance is out of whack, is that we need more of the students to be accommodated on campus. They have a preference to be there, and we're going to start seeing more of that happen. And I just again want to say, if anybody's not going to be able to come tomorrow, please live stream it, or you'll be able to see it anytime later on the Facebook page as well. Anna.
Hi, thank you so much. It was a wonderful talk. One thing that I'm curious if you've seen this and what your experience has been in other communities. One of the things that we do here to stimulate growth in the city are abatements or tax breaks, and the requirements are that I think it needs to be 3 floors, livable space, and there's I think it's $500,000 value, and in the downtown core. And one of the things that I've been hearing from smaller developers, a bunch of smaller developers, is that they would love to be a part of that it would help encourage that sort of medium-level development that might be the condos, or have you seen any expansion of tax abatements that has encouraged the smaller developers? So that was just a question. If you've seen that, if you encourage it, and your feedback.
So let me answer this in a way that really captures my true feeling. The challenge that we have today in meeting affordability in housing is the fact that we have a missing middle. We have, as Joel pointed out, yes, there's a lot of interest to go high. And there's clear interest to maintain single-family housing. But there is this space between small-scale development that actually, and one of the things I wanted to say to Joel is that one of the natural reactions someone would have to a suggestion like that is you don't want to lose the natural character of the region. And this is where the missing middle is so important. Because that's the piece that connects the tissue of your traditional single-family, small duplex to your high-rise. And that's where you get your character. And so, yes, missing middle, whether it's 5 to 10 units, are very important. There are a lot of cities that are using all sorts of tax incentives to encourage that. One way on the regulatory side is basically give at right. If you literally have form-based codes, if you meet these requirements, you can build. One of the challenges, and one of the slides I did not include, as you saw, there are some federal requirements, federal impediments to this missing middle. And one of those, and I give you an example. Imagine if you're trying to build or retrofit a 2 or 3 story building, and the rents are not there. What you really want to do is kind of expand the commercial space to compensate for the loss you're going to get in the rents. However, there are HUD programs like the 220D program that's supposed to incentivize small-scale development, but they have a limitation on how much commercial space you can have in the building. Now, naturally, if you care about affordability, right, you want to make sure that that commercial space can help take some of the costs out. But unfortunately, if a developer wants to get financing, right, he has to follow the rules. And so that's the place that a lot of cities are trying to fit in that rubric, where the federal government won't support. And interesting enough, we've been working with CNU and a number of other organizations to change that specific modification to actually move it from, which was traditionally 15%, and is now about 25%. But we've given authority to the HUD regional administrator to actually go even higher for those jurisdictions if it's in walkable urban places. So yes, tax abatement is one strategy. HUD administrators now have the ability to use their financing programs to incentivize that. And to Joel's point, you have to have the missing middle to piece together the community, because otherwise some of these individuals will be totally opposed to having new sky rises popping up around Ithaca or in the county. Exactly. So,
there's a lot of buildings.
All right, are there any more questions? Is that Joel? Come on up to the mic. And let me just say again, if anybody, as more people leave, if you're not already registered, please put your name and contact information on one of the comment cards and hand that in. And we'll stay in touch. Yeah. Go ahead.
Seth Adams, a small developer. Speaking of the missing middle, I'm a member of that. I'm a member of the small missing middle. A small developer here in Ithaca, Corning, as well as Elmira. And with respect to Anna's question, we both serve on the Downtown Ithaca Alliance Board. And one thing that I discovered here in the past year as a small developer, in pushing efforts for tax abatement programs in these communities, I led an effort, or was part of an effort in Elmira, to push a New York real property law, 444A. Some may be familiar with that program. I called the local tax assessor here in Tompkins County. He seemed relatively unaware that abatement was being utilized. I was very surprised, considering the number of historic buildings, rehabilitation projects that are for individual homeowners as well as people who do old historic buildings, such as myself. So there are programs available, I think, that also may be just underutilized within the county that maybe we might need to look at.
Perfect.
Jay, is that you up there? Jay, you want to comment? Let's put Jay on the spot. Jay Franklin, our county assessor. I told you we might need you here. So this will be the last thing, and I think if you could also talk about the other question about exemptions, or like capping property taxes for a senior citizen or adult stage 2.
Well, there's over 250 exemptions that New York State offers. There's a lot of unique ones that are out there. The historic property exemption is offered by the county and the city for properties within the historic district. I think there's 3 properties right now that receive that benefit. So there is some, but with the big tax being the school tax, it's really not all that beneficial. We could, you can't cap any taxes. The real property tax is an ad valorem tax. It's based upon value. In order to be fair and equitable, everything is taxable at its value unless there's an exemption. There has been talk about doing a circuit breaker at the state level over the last few years, but that hasn't gone through because it's not fair and equitable. The same argument you can make for a senior citizen, you can make for the first-time home buyers with children, and do they have that same capacity to spend the money on their housing as the senior citizen who no longer has that mortgage payment? So it's something we could pursue with the state, and If the law allows it, then my office is more than happy to administer it.
Thanks, Jay. And I think with that, I think we'll close. I really appreciate everybody being here, appreciate your questions. And I would just underscore what Christopher said about that there are a lot of different things that, may not think that initiative or that idea is going to make such a huge difference. But if we put a lot of different things together, I think we really those can add up to creating a more equitable, sustainable community for all of us. So thanks so much for coming. Hope to see a lot of you tomorrow.